So in this segment, we're going to be talking about Labour just absolutely messing up the situation with the WASPI women. I don't think you need a ton of backstory for this one. Do they deserve compensation? I think potentially, given the fact that the ombudsman said that it was right for the government to compensate these women. That's not a person I'm going to argue with, given that they would have heard a lot of testimony and a lot of evidence. But Labour just complete morons, because they kept pretending that they were backing the WASPI women in their campaign to get compensation, and as soon as they come into government, they're like, nah, see ya.
This was maladministration. We accept that, and we are sorry, but we don't agree to what the Ombudsman concluded on injustice and on remedy. Even if we had sent those letters out, we provided research which showed it wouldn't have made the difference, the Ombudsman said. And for that reason, we aren't providing compensation.
They're not providing compensation because they don't want to pay for it. They don't want to allocate the funds for it. You can't accept the guilt and offer no compensation. Like that's crazy. Like a company that did this sort of stuff would have to offer compensation, but the ombudsman their ruling is not legally binding. That's the difference. If this was a private company and they went to court, that company would have to give over compensation. There's a lot of clips to go through and things like that. You've got Labour MPs confront Liz Kendall over WASPI decision in leaked WhatsApp messages. So you have, I'm not too familiar with all of these MPs. There's a lot of new ones. Michelle Scroggum MP. When our members react like this and solid Labour question backing the party, you have to wonder, how did we get here? I was elected under a banner of integrity. I stood shoulder to shoulder with these women and promised to fight for them, as many of us did. My integrity is worth more than this. Clearly it's not, pal. Julia Buckley says, I feel your pain and struggle to understand the reasoning or politics behind this decision. It's not hard. They don't want to allocate the 10 billion it would cost to do this. Why were other options not considered for a targeted compensation scheme? This is very difficult to explain to our constituents who deserve better. Well, clearly they don't, because they voted for you guys. Or gals, should I say. Sarah Champion agreed, ignoring all of that, accepting balance, the books, etc. Why was it decided to announce this before recess, when journalists were bored and everyone is spending time with their granny? What have we not learned from the winter fuel payment announcement? This person is Sarah Champion. Clearly understands politics better than the leadership and the cabinet, because this story is going to rumble on for a while. You imagine, like, your aunt or your grandma is one of these people who've been impacted by the taking away the winter fuel payment, but also not being compensated as a WASPI. It'd be crazy. Imagine how pissed they would be. Olivia Blake saying, I fear the political cost of this will outweigh the financial cost of compensation significantly. She's probably right. But then again, this is a small group of voters, which I don't know. This is one of the things Labour take into account. But they have pissed off a lot of small groups, a lot of different groups. And that voter coalition they had that won in the election will not be the same. You got Helena Dollymore saying, well done at Rushanra Ali on Today this morning. Rushanra put it well. WASPI women, like everyone, benefit from rescuing our public services and protecting triple lock and more. I know this will be hard for WASPI women, but my anger is channeled at the Tories who left it in this mess, and of course Jeremy Corbyn, the 2019 manifesto for raising expectations of WASPI women in an unfunded promise that could never be delivered, when it could easily have been delivered if you allocate the money to it. This is just pure cowardice from this MP here. Julia Buckley saying it's very hard for WASPI women and for any MPs who represent them, and in certain constituencies there will be a lot more of them, and that's going to be a problem for Labour. Dawn Butler saying, I'm actually in shock that this announcement was made yesterday. Why was it necessary to make it yesterday? We would never have done this under Tony or Gordon. It's Christmas recess. We would always focus on good news, knowing it will be quiet for journalists. It's the second time this point has been made. In fact, the grid would be focused on positive announcements. I'm a solution-based person, so I've been thinking today, even though we will be feeling the pressure, I would suggest everyone be as loud as possible to support the PM, because if we go into Christmas on a low, then it will be the story and no one will get a good break. And I think everyone needs a rest. I'll try to make the WASPI meeting. We have a lot more work to do with women of a certain age. So yeah, you're just trying to PR spin this. It's not happening. Kat Ackles saying, support them when they have no respect for us, to even give us some warning. So she's talking about the cabinet. Other parties knew the statement was coming up before we did. Shameful. So it's probably leaked to the media. Stella Creasley, saying it would be good to know what the government legal advice on this is, as it's inevitably going to end up as a judicial review. Now, if it ends up as a judicial review, that's going to be interesting. Alternative dispute resolution like ombudsman are designed to avoid that, so it would be good to know if lawyers think saying sorry is enough to honour what ombudsman argued needed to be done and compensate, or else judges could end up being particularly generous as a warning. So again, like, they might end up paying more because they're going to have to pay legal fees and things like that. So this could be a very stupid decision for Labour in the longer run, especially because they've already admitted to guilt as well. So, you know, if it does go to judicial review, that's going to be one of the things the judges do take into account. To be honest, it is a concern on principle, as if the government can ignore an ombudsman, so too can any accompanying, which may mean a lot more of our constituents goaded into legal costs, even if the WASPI claims were unaffordable in current economic climate. So Stella Creasley making some good points there. Yeah, you know, they don't want to be hassled over Christmas, I guess, but they're going to get that. Here you got Peston writing about this, saying, I have a few thoughts about the government's refusal to pay compensation to WASPI women for the failure of previous administrations to properly inform them about the significant increases to the state pension age for women. First, if this proven maladministration had been by a bank or private sector institution, my hunch is regulators and courts would have compelled the payment. So that was the point I made earlier, because I robbed that from Peston. The ability of government to just say no is a striking contrast. So the fact the government can say no is a massive problem. But again, if it does go to judicial review, like Stella Creasley mentioned, yeah, it's over. The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman agrees with me that if the government's proven WASPI maladministration had instead been maladministration by a bank or private sector institution, the courts and or regulator would have been able to compel them to do payment. So we'll keep an eye on that aspect of it. Here you got West Streeting saying, last week I wrote to thousands of women in Ilford North to pledge my support for the WASPI campaign, and today I've signed the WASPI pledge. So did Jeremy Corbyn make him do that? Here you've got an MP just saying it's just too expensive for the government to compensate these the women, which I think is a joke. Here's some more analysis.
Diane Abbott, do you, Prime Minister, really understand how let down WASPI women feel? He said he did understand.
No, he doesn't. That's the problem. He doesn't. One of the things about Keir is he's only been in the party a relatively short period of time. He was DPP until, I think, 2014, and he couldn't have been a member of the party. Then he got parachuted into Keir. No, he got parachuted into
St Pancras.
Holborn, just parachuted in, didn't have to contest for it.
So I think NJ was saying that the reason they brought Starmer in was to be, I think it was Attorney General they wanted, because he's got a legal background.
Then, because it was a safe seat, he didn't have to fight for that, and he has no feel for politics. Now, he might say, I've got a great feel for politics because I smashed people like you, but he's got no feel for politics. He doesn't understand how they feel. Remember, he's on his big fat DPP pension. What does he know about, you know, ageing women who really will depend on the state pension?
It's a fair point, to be fair. He has got a big pension. Maybe Starmer does lack empathy. You know, this is the person who actually made the decision here, the Ombudsman.
And I think it's really important, coming on to that obviously not every woman in that cohort will qualify for compensation, because very many of them did know and did act accordingly in terms of financial planning for the years ahead. I think that part of why the government has backed away from setting out a compensation scheme is that we're not really very good at compensation schemes in this country. They tend to be over-engineered, overly bureaucratic, take too long, and not pay out swiftly enough.
The reason they do that is because they don't want to pay in the first place. That's why you make such a bureaucratic system, because it's expensive. Bureaucracy does cost money, but the reason they do this is because they just don't want to pay out in the first place.
I think if that we were better at setting up those sorts of schemes, they didn't end up costing as much as they do, I think Parliament would take a different view at this point about whether the government would take a different view about what to do in this instance.
Just finally, what do you make then of the government saying sorry, saying that something was wrong, hearing your report, setting it all up, getting to your conclusion, and then saying, nah, I don't fancy it, sorry? What does that say about government, of members of whom, senior members of whom, have promised those WASPI women that they would right this injustice?
I think it's really important to focus on the women. So what's happened, the delays in writing out by the government has left thousands of women who will never know whether or not their futures would have been better planned, whether they'd have made better decisions if they'd had that time earlier. And that goes to financial autonomy for women and empowerment, which of course is an area which has been sadly lacking historically and where we should therefore be much more focused on as a society. We're now hoping that Parliament will look to consider the government's response and think about how it wants to hold them to account to doing something in relation to compensation that we've recommended for the women who've been impacted.
So in terms of the votes, I think only the Lib Dems and the SNP would back compensation. I don't imagine a reform would. I think Tice was against it. You've got the Labour Party who are against it, or parts of the Labour Party that are against it, the top team, and the Tories were against it as well. So there's not the votes in Parliament to actually get this compensation scheme off the ground if it was going to go to a vote. And the reality of the situation is this.
Believe that they sort of knew they weren't going to, because they knew it was unbelievably expensive. They knew there wasn't much money lying around. They said it because it was easy. They said it because they wanted you on side. They said it because it's much harder to say, yeah, I see your point, but it's tight, isn't it? And things are tricky and stuff, so we'll have to see.
And, Reeves did, I think she told some of the WASPI campaigners that she had allocated no money to the compensation.
They could have said that, but they chose not to, because that's harder. And it's just easier to stand there with a placard saying, I support you and I think you're right.
That's gesture politics, which Keir Starmer's against.
When I get into power, if you trust me, I will... And they didn't. Of course they weren't.
So, yeah, he's not wrong. And this is kind of on the same kind of vein.
Well, we also want to talk about the story that's dominated the last 24 hours in British politics, the fallout over so-called WASPI women. It's a story about a generation who feel that the government moved the goalposts on their retirement and basically didn't bother to tell them. But really, this is also about something deeper too, about whether politicians are bold enough to tell the truth. Labour are in a mess because they wanted the votes of these pensioners and effectively weren't brave enough to tell them no until now. And as for the...
Which is typical politics, really. If this was, when Boris Johnson was there, he'd be called smart and whatever because he did what he had to do, which is he won. And, you can make the argument, you can try and make the argument that Labour are clever for doing this. But if you do that, you have to make the case that basically no politician can be trusted, and therefore why would we vote for the politicians that you actually like versus voting Green and just wasting our vote in seats where the Green Party can't win, because we might as well at that point, because why would we vote for a bunch of losers who are going to go against their own interests anyways?
The Tories, well, they've been looking to land blows today, not least Prime Minister's questions, but they actually agree with Labour. They wouldn't offer compensation either. It is a mess that wouldn't have come about if politicians were able to confront difficult realities quickly and honestly.
And that's it, really. If you're honest, you lose votes. It's just a game to win. The WASPI campaign saying up to 100 Labour MPs could vote against the WASPI payout refusal has significant support from backbenchers, many of whom pledged their support as recently as October. Now, we saw this, as the person points out below, during the winter fuel allowance thing, where you had, there were talks about 100 rebels potentially. You're probably getting about 10 at most. Like Labour talking about we have to manage public finances responsibly, which again, okay, but why did you make out like you were going to give out compensation to these women when you didn't? You can make arguments about being fiscally responsible, but at the end of the day, people expect you to deliver. And we're going to look at the clips in a bit where, the Labour Party were talking about basically compensation. And it's just, this is an abomination. You got to question and ask yourself here, what other policies are Labour going to nix in this kind of pursuit of fiscal responsibility, which we know is kind of nonsensical anyways. If you understand economics, you would know that. Caroline Lucas saying, it's betraying a fundamental trust in politics. And I agree with her.
What this case in particular reminds me of is what happened over tuition fees with the Liberal Democrats. and the apology that Nick Clegg had to put out when they went into coalition government, when they'd been photographed near quite similar-looking placards pledging not to put up top-up fees.
The thing is that I'm pretty sure that was a manifesto pledge not to raise tuition fees. And the other problem is the Lib Dems ran into was like they got a lot of support from students, obviously young people, and these are people who are probably going to vote for the next 60 years. Whereas, I don't want to phrase it in this way, but like the people, the WASPI generation, are much older, and so there's a much shorter lifespan for their votes, to try and put it mildly. And here we have a supercar. No, there's Rachel Reeves here talking about this, but I've got a better clip somewhere down here. But an MP refusing to accept that that it's a betrayal.
Just to get elected.
Oh, I don't accept that.
How can you not accept it? You promised one thing and now you've taken it off them. How can you not accept it? Which bit of that is incorrect?
We are focused on, as I say, making sure we invest in our economy, we grow our economy, we tackle the NHS crisis.
I told that, when I told Bola Hammond, like the fiscal rules are what's everything going to hinge on, because that's all they keep talking about. And this guy, and I'm not going to insult him, even though he kind of deserves it. This guy was like, oh, it's a smokescreen and all of this stuff, right? It wasn't a smokescreen, mate. They were honest with you. That was the only thing they were honest about, is the fiscal rules, balancing the books, all of that kind of stuff. And you fell for it, just like these women did.
Which particularly those who are older in our society, pensioners, rely on the National Health Service. We've seen a devastation of our public services, and we must rebuild those services. We must fix those foundations.
This country has been built on the shoulders of these women who worked for most of their lives. They were made a promise time and time again.
The framing there is a bit off.
By your government before you got into power, and now you've literally said, nah, sorry, it's not happening.
I don't accept that.
Like,
there are, as I say, we have
accepted.
We have accepted.
I think this is a really pathetic answer from this Labour MP. I'll be honest. I think this is the one that blamed Corbyn.
Need to make sure that these things don't happen.
It's not good.
She was the one that was cited earlier about blaming Corbyn. So here you got Rachel Reeves.
Pension age feel disappointed by this decision, but we looked at in full at the Ombudsman recommendations, and they said that around 90% of women did know that these changes were coming, and as Chancellor,
surely you'd have to compensate just the 10% then who didn't know.
Have to account for every penny of taxpayers' money spent, and given...
Didn't you spend like 10 grand on folders or some nonsense? And I think that there's going to be a push to get a vote on this, just like they did with the winter fuel payment. So we'll see how that goes.
Justice was done for 1950s born women. It ruled that they are owed compensation, and that Parliament intervened to deliver justice. In my constituency of Liverpool, West Derby, I have more than 5,000 women affected. And alongside a great many members in this House, I believe these women are owed compensation for the injustice done to them at the hands of the state. So will the Prime Minister give members the opportunity to vote on whether they believe WASPI women are owed compensation?
So this is a Labour MP who's saying this.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've just set out the factual background and the percentage that knew about the change. And the
well, if that's the case, if there was enough people who knew about it, why were you campaigning with them? Surely you said it should check the news, pal.
The simple fact of the matter is, in the current economic circumstances, the taxpayer can't bear the burden of tens of billions.
So you've got this gentleman here. He's got about 5,000 women in his constituency who've been impacted. Now, I did look at the numbers earlier. He even if he lost 5,000 votes, he'd still keep his seat. It'd be slightly more nervy, but it's a relatively safe seat for Labour. But he's got potentially 5,000 constituents to be banging at his door regarding this, and that's the thing they're trying to avoid, because politicians don't like being unpopular, and so they don't like criticism. And this guy here is going to end up getting a lot of criticism, I think. And you've got obviously the GOAT, Jonathan Ashworth, the most intelligent man in Britain. That's why he's always being interviewed.
If you spend 10 billion here, it's 10 billion less somewhere else. Didn't in the manifesto.
You promised. I can read all the quotes to you if you like, but the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime
I don't think there's anything in the manifesto about WASPI women. I did check before.
Minister, the Minister in charge, the Chancellor, all said, we're going to look after you. It's an injustice.
It wasn't in the manifesto. And they may have said that...
Stuff that was in the manifesto didn't happen either.
It may have said that back in the day, years and years ago.
It's years and years ago. Back in 1775, before the formation of America. No, it was 2022 powers. Like, I think 22, 23. I think even as recently as October, some Labour MPs were backing it. So this year, buddy.
But it wasn't in the manifesto, and they've come into government
2 years ago, 2022.
and they've looked at the
March
finances.
2022, Scottish Labour Party conference.
Yeah, but the manifesto was in June 2024, and we looked at the public finances.
What
and
did you say then?
And we were very clear in our manifesto that we would only pursue policies which are properly funded and
Why
costed.
did you say then we're not going to help these women?
Well, I mean...
You know that more women vote than men, and you know that more women, middle-class women of a certain age, vote than men, and they voted for you guys because you promised to help them.
We didn't promise.
I'm going to read you...
You've not quoted me. Have you found me?
I haven't...
Have
no,
your researchers
but
found me?
No, they haven't, but...
Yeah, because I had clocked that the government wouldn't be able to fund...
Do you see the concern there? Oh, it's not me, is it?
Afford this because it's £10 billion.
Back in 2022, the now Prime Minister said this is a real injustice. That's why there's been a big campaign about it. It's not...
Tony Blair criticised the Tories because his criticism was the Tories say, we don't want to have to make these cuts, but we have to. It's unfortunate, right? And now we've got Labour saying, this is an injustice. How can we let this stand? And then once they're actually in charge, they're like, nah, public finances, bro, fiscal rules and all that.
Not just that the age has changed to 67. All your working life, you've got in mind the date on which you can retire and get your pension. And just as you get towards it, the goalposts are moved and you don't get it. And it's a real injustice.
But it's £10 billion, and the government simply cannot afford that because of the state of their public
how
finances.
How much do you think it was going to be?
But, I mean, since that point, we've had the Liz Truss budget.
Yeah, Liz Truss.
We've had the Tories completely making the Horlicks of the public finances, running the economy off a cliff. The £10 billion simply isn't there.
Why didn't you make it clear before the election?
Well, I think we didn't say we would. In the election campaign,
You didn't say you wouldn't, and you gave the impression beforehand you would do something.
Never said we would fund this.
So, I mean, can you imagine being a member of the public and seeing how deceptive this is? Especially if Kay Burley actually framed it properly. Because I would have just ran with, not this clip, I've got it here somewhere, I really hope I do. I would have ran with this. How did you play this?
When they were in opposition, Labour said again and again and again that it was going to help these women. It virtually bent over backwards. It joined them on their campaigns. It held up their posters. It said, trust us, we'll sort this out for you. It's not surprising that we're hearing words like hypocrisy and betrayal.
It's not just...
Because the expectation was there. This is Starmer radio interview.
That the age is 67. It's that for... And this probably is the case for you, I guess, Carol, that all your working life you've got in mind the date on which you can retire and get your pension, and then just as you get towards it, the goalposts are moved and you don't get it.
Moving the goalposts on state pension age equalisation so rapidly is the last affront to a generation of women whose working lives have already been too challenging.
I agree with the current Pensions Minister, who said, unfortunately, the government has not given women enough time to change their plans. These women have already accepted an increase in their state pension age, but they were given time to adjust. Suddenly, these same women are being targeted again, but this time they are not given enough notice as the changes start in just 5 years.
We've been so badly treated by this Tory government.
Jesus Christ, that audio is terrible.
They've had their pension age increase, no proper warning. It's moving the goalposts when people can't plan. It's completely unfair. I've been joining them and fighting to try and get this changed. I think it's completely unfair.
Oh, if only you were in the cabinet, pal. If only you guys were in government and you were in the cabinet and you're a senior minister.
It is wrong to disproportionately hurt a group of women with such little notice when they have such little chance of making up the difference.
Millions of women have been plunged into poverty and don't just want handouts by social security. They want their money back. And
if only someone would give their money back. If only.
Quite rightly so, they should be feeling angry about what the government did.
But if you look at these pictures, these are Labour front benchers now.
Deputy Prime Minister.
In opposition, and they were campaigning with the WASPI women, who they say today, the WASPI women, that they have every right.
There you go, look, there's a picture there. Got you in 24p. 240p.
Under the rules of common sense and fair play, to have absolutely assumed that they were going to have the support of the Labour government. Yeah.
And so I don't blame them. You had so many people, these pro-EU people saying, Labour are going to take us back into the single market and all this stuff, despite it not being in the manifesto, and they're mad at Labour, despite Labour saying the exact opposite. These are the people who he's literally in pictures holding up their placards and stuff. Fair enough, it wasn't in their manifesto. But you'd have to make the argument any positive Labour moves that aren't in the manifesto, should they be doing them then? If that's the way we're going to play things, like they gave every indication outside the manifesto they would give compensation to these women, and they didn't. And so what you have is a guy who's deeply untrustworthy in Keir Starmer, who has given more reasons to the public not to trust him.
Right.
That's why I said it's a betrayal.
Look at those images.
But Kevin, yes, exactly.
We will compensate them for the money that they've lost. This is their money that they've had stolen.
Who stole it, Ange? Was it the state that you now control?
I want to keep fighting for a fair deal for the WASPI women.
Clearly a fair deal is no money.
I hope that she will now stand by those who she spoke up for then, as I and other members will continue to do until we get that justice.
We will right that injustice, because justice is a price worth paying.
It's a real injustice, and we need to do something about it.
God damn, this lot more evil than evil Superman in Injustice. This is, it's just painful. And, they've given the media every right to run with these clips, and they probably will over the next week or so, because they've nothing better to do anyways. There's no other major stories coming out.
I understand people's concern, absolutely, and my auntie is a WASPI woman. I get it very strongly. She's not happy at all. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I hope she's not invited you for Christmas dinner, pal, because you might get some really bad food.
So
there's no decision to vote on the WASPI compensation. Someone putting, you could almost feel sympathy for MPs. You get paid like 90k. I don't feel any sympathy for them. So yeah, that kind of does our supercut, I guess, of the situation with the WASP women and compensation. Labour have dropped the ball on this so hard that it's gone to the other side of the planet. I don't know what more to say about it. They are pissing off so many different groups of people now. This is going to become untenable at some point. Their polling is in the ground. Their unfavourability is in the ground. Starmer's best hope, because they are openly, there are MPs plotting to get rid of him. They just need a replacement. I pray to God, fam, it's not Wes Streeting. I saw NJ saying it could be the Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary. That could be quite interesting. And her rationale was she ticks the identity politics boxes. She's northern and she's a lady. Labour have never had a woman in charge of the party, so that's some good reasoning behind that. But I think the only disagreement I have is, given that there's accusations of it being a boys' club, the Morgan McSweeney and those guys, I imagine that they wouldn't want Bridget Phillipson in because they wouldn't want someone to break their boys' club effectively. It's one of the reasons why they got rid of Sue Gray. So I think they would be looking at Wes Streeting, to be honest with you. It makes sense. He's an arrogant twat, so he'd fit in quite well in that group. But this from Labour is a complete collapse, in my opinion. This is one of the dumbest things they could have ever done. To give all of these kind of hints and indications they would back these women and just decide not to do it, it is madness, in my opinion. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.